The stone groaned as if the mountain itself were tired of swallowing screams. Water bled through fissures and struck the floor in a relentless count. Drip, drip, drip. Chains scraped. Keys clinked. A door moaned open at the far end of the corridor, letting in a bruised orange flare of torchlight and the smell of iron. Two wardens stalked forward wearing the black leathers of Obsidian Maw, the rival pack that turned pain into a sport. Daretha's muzzle bore an old knife seam. Kel's grin looked chiseled from broken glass. Between them lay the cell everyone in the hollow deeps pretended not to see. "On your feet, Redbane," Dareth said, unlocking the gate. "Alpha's orders." The woman inside rose with the blunt grace of someone who had been dragged too many times to pretend she couldn't walk. Filth clung to her hair, but the ember red beneath still showed. Rune-bruised cuffs gnawed her wrists, silver-laced iron carved with suppression sigils that flared faintly whenever she breathed too deep. Her name once weighed like a crown. Down here, names were taken first. The wardens called her Redbane because silver burned redder on her skin than most and because the strange shadow that bled from her when she neared a shift frightened even the men who enjoyed frightening others. They hauled her into the corridor. Cells on either side exhaled the same breathless hush. Prisoners looked without looking, ruined wolves, stolen healers, rogues who gambled and lost against a pack that never stopped collecting debts. Opposite her cell, small fingers curled around iron. A thin face peered through bars. The boy was too young for a place like this, too steady-eyed for any place at all. The wardens called him Whelp. He answered to nothing. Nothing except the sound of a story at night. "Keep close, little ghost," Redbane told him quietly as they passed. "Hold the bars and breathe small." He nodded once, obedience taught by survival, not fear. The stairwell fell colder the deeper they went. Wolfsbane smoldered somewhere out of sight. The scent stiffened the bones. The cleansing chamber yawned open, a slab of blackened stone, chains dangling from the ceiling, a brazier pulsing white-hot. Implements lined the wall in polite, polished rows. Hooks. Brands. Things that had learned too much about flesh. Garrick, warden of the deeps, stood at the center with arms folded. His face had weathered into resignation long ago, not sadness or joy, just the habit of breaking things. "She resists conditioning," Garrick said, as if reciting inventory. "Lady Seraphine Vale returns from the southern marches at dusk. The Alpha wants compliance." Kel shoved her onto the slab. Leather bit into ankles, thighs, waist, wrists. The suppression mask came last, iron-shaped for a muzzle, pressed against a human face, runes waking in a hiss. The smell of searing skin climbed the air like a ghost. Garrick's voice never rose. "Most submitted by the 20th. You outlive statistics, Redbane." The brand touched her shoulder. The world split. Shadow spilled under her skin like smoke trying to find a mouth. Bones shivered toward a shift the chains refused. Claws bit the stone. A barbed lash marked her ribs. Another brand bit her hip. Wolfsbane cloth jammed her throat and burned from the inside. By the time the straps loosened, silence had folded over the chamber like a shroud. They dragged her back. The corridor breathed again. Across the way, the boy had wedged his small cheek between bars to watch for her return. "You're still here," he said, with a certainty that didn't ask permission from reality. "For now," she answered, lowering herself to the floor, spine caged by fire. The torchlight couldn't find her eyes, it only found the scars. The boy hummed something barely louder than breath. A lullaby, old as moonlit stone. Hush, little wolf cub. The moon keeps the watch. Your pack finds you at dawn. Redbane went still. The song threaded the air like silver wire. The runes in her cuffs heated as if memory itself carried a temperature. Across the stone, the child hummed on, unconcerned with history or permission. "Where did you learn that?" she asked. He frowned as if the answer were hiding behind his tongue. "Feels like I've always known it." She turned her face to the wall and listened. The lullaby held a corridor in it, narrow, moonlit, safe. A hand smoothed a blanket. A voice promised morning. The memory came like lightning striking ice, quick, bright, cracking the seal but not breaking it. "Again," she said. He did. The song wrapped itself around the silence until the silence had to listen. The horn sounded at dawn, a tearing, three-bell wound that shook dust from the ceiling and steadied hands on weapon hilts. Twice before, that horn had called. Cells opened. Prisoners vanished. Their names were not spoken again. "All prisoners to the auction square," a guard shouted. "Skeldark Keep welcomes honored guests." Redbane stood when the gate swung wide. She had seen the keep only in fever drift, a black courtyard carved into the mountain's heart and paved with other people's endings. Today, she climbed into it, eyes narrowing against a sun that felt like knives on a creature made to live in shadow. Skeldark Keep looked like a crown hammered from obsidian and regret. Banners of obsidian moss snapped in a wind that carried iron, ash, and the roar of a crowd that came to value lives by the way they bled. Alpha Cade Onyx stood at the dais, scarred and vaunted, enjoying the music of submission. "Welcome," Cade called. "We offer rarities today. Rogues of spirit. Healers with gifts. Wolves who learn obedience or teach entertainment." Redbane's chains were polished for display. Wardens fixed her to a post at center stage. The crowd's attention crawled over her like locusts. "Behold," Cade said, with a flourish meant for theater. "The Redbane of hollow deeps. 8 winters under stone and still unshattered." Murmurs rolled through the square. Wolves from distant territories assessed muscle and myth. Coin purses shifted. Bids tasted the air before they landed. The sound collapsed. He entered like a pressure change. Height that made iron look uncertain. Scar fields mapped in old wars and never forgotten. Dark hair falling to his shoulders. A cloak of dusk pelt dragging the light after it. But it was the eyes, gold, alive, sovereign, that changed the temperature of the square. The obsidian maw bowed first, then the visitors, then the wind. Even Alpha Cade bent a knee. "Your Majesty," Cade said, shaping fear into flattery. "Theron Draven, Alpha King of the Silvercrest Dominion, honors our simple market." "I go where I decide," Theron said without raising his voice. "You advertised wonders." He did not look at the merchandise as a buyer does. He looked the way a storm looks at a coastline. His gaze swept the dais. The 3 wolves pacing at his flanks were darker than their shadows, eyes ember red, breath fogging in the sun. When his eyes reached Redbane, the bond marked beneath grime and scar lit like a star waking from burial. Heat shot her wrist. Her breath hitched despite discipline. Theron's hand flexed. His jaw rallied against something private. The wolves froze mid-step. "Look at me," he said quietly. She kept her chin down. chains cut arcs in the light. Look at me. He lifted her face with a touch that had no business being gentle. Gold flashed against ruin red. The world did not so much brighten as return to a recollection of brightness. The air reminded me of spring. The stone remembered vows. Impossible, he said, not to the crowd but to a promise cracked by time. Ravenna. The name struck like a lantern on a frozen lake, light sliding in all directions, shattering the cold from within. Seals groaned. Memory seeped, not in scenes but in instincts, a hand in her hair, a circlet on her brow, a small heartbeat tucked beneath her palm. Theron, she answered. The syllables left ash and arrived as water. The cuffs flared, furious at recognition. The wolves at his side lifted their heads and inhaled like a pack hearing the reason they were made. Alpha Cade recovered first, laughter eager to reclaim ground. A trick of scent, Majesty. This one is ours, collared, branded, and paid for. Theron did not glance his way. He pulled the chain once. Iron snapped as if embarrassed to have pretended power. Suppression sigils blew apart in a gust of nothing. Red Bane, Ravenna, swayed as weight left her more abruptly than pain. Anyone who touches her, Theron said to everyone, dies before he thinks about it. The square forgot how to speak. Somewhere behind the crowd, a small voice tested a single word it should not have known. The sound cut cleanly through clamor to where it was meant to land. Father. The boy stood near the back of the dais, thin wrists in fresh shackles, eyes tilted up. For the first time in daylight, their color betrayed their lineage, gold tasting of old oaths. The lullaby still burned the edges of the morning. Theron turned. The wolves went statue still. Shock pulled a crack through the iron of his restraint. What child is this? He asked. The boy took one step forward because fear could not negotiate with recognition. I am Corin, he said, voice steady around the ground. I think I know your eyes. No one moved. Even the banners remembered to be quiet. Ravenna's breath left her chest in a sound that once had been a sob and now refused the past tense. She took one step, then another, until the chain's last link scraped the post and hung loose like a question without a future. Alpha Cade recovered again, summoning menace like a cloak to ward off weather. Majesty, Obsidian Maw owns the cub, same as the woman. If the Silvercrest King wants trinkets, we're happy to talk numbers. Theron closed the space to Cade in 3 strides. He set a hand on the rival Alpha's throat with the caution a hunter uses when ensuring a trap is sprung only on the right prey. I don't buy what was taken from me, he said, calm as winter. I'll take it back. The keep bristled. Spears lowered. The visiting packs shifted their weight, suddenly aware they had wandered into a story larger than a coin. Theron's wolves circled the dais. Garrick watched from the edge, expressing a rock no tide would move. Lady Seraphine Vale, returned unannounced from the south in silk the color of ripened wine, took a silent step from the shadow of the arch. Her smile never reached her eyes. Your Majesty, she called, all grace. Skeldark holds court today. Perhaps courtesy. Courtesy was broken, Theron said without looking. I am here to bind it back to law. He broke the last ring from Ravenna's wrist and set his cloak around her shoulders. The pelt whispered of pine and frost and the kind of night that forgives. Stand, he told her softly. She did. The crowd saw bones and scars turn into a posture remembered from old ceremonies, upright, unbent, impossibly alive. Cade's patience thinned to the brittle shine of a blade. "You can't carry slaves out of obsidian maw without price," he snarled. "It would be war?" Theron asked, turning back, gold slicing the sun. "Declare it." Cade hesitated. He measured the three wolves with coal eyes and smelled which way the winter would go. "Today is a market, not a battlefield," Lady Seraphine interposed lightly, stepping forward with the air of someone offering calmer seas. "Let us complete the pageant. Then the Silvercrest delegation may retire to discuss transfers." The wardens shifted. The visiting alphas leaned toward the scent of spectacle. Cade smiled again now that diplomacy wore perfume. Theron did not indulge. He lifted a hand. His wolves stilled, then flowed, three shadows sliding through the aisle. Shackles rang open wherever they looked. The sound traveled like a rumor refined into proof. The square whispered back its fear. Ravenna stood at center, wrapped in a king's night, eyes on a boy who had the moon's color packed into his irises. "Come here," Theron told Corin, voice formal by necessity, gentle by default. Corin stepped. The wardens reached, the wolves warned, the wardens remembered their families. Ravenna knelt when he arrived. The cloak pooled like dusk around them both. "Do you know this song?" Corin asked her, because he didn't understand politics and he understood the right question. He hummed the melody he had threaded through the dungeon air. The lullaby rose like a moon hauled by hand. Ravenna's cuffs sighed as if they had wanted to be nothing all along. The seal behind her eyes cracked in another place. "Once more," she said. He hummed. She pressed both palms to the stone as if the earth were a drum and she could awaken its truer rhythm. The runes cut into her skin, lit not with suppression but with a molten gold that burned through every letter somebody else had written on her body. The chains on the post blackened and sloughed away like snakeskins. The crowd gasped. Lady Seraphine's smile tightened into mathematics. Garrick's head bowed a fraction, acknowledging the force that didn't ask for acknowledgement. Alpha Cade spat to the side and reached for his spear. "Enough." Theron released him without a flourish, as if the man had become irrelevant. "Enough," he agreed, and meant something wider. He faced the crowd, voice carrying without strain. "You are looking at your Luna returned." Heads turned without permission. Old stories stirred where they had been buried under lesser entertainments. The visiting alphas muttered names from history and fear. Theron extended his hand. Ravenna rose into it. When skin met skin, light leapt between them, not fire but bond. It dragged a breath from every wolf present. Some staggered. Some bowed. Many understood. "Her name," Theron said, "so the keep must hear it, is Ravenna Solace. She is mine. She is not for sale." A dozen obsidian maw brutes lunged at once because obedience trained by cruelty prefers numbers. The three dusk wolves moved as if music had handed them a choreography. Red arcs, black shadows, falls that did not rise. Silence again, full and clear. Lady Seraphine inclined her head the length courtesy demanded. "A moving reunion," she said. "And the boy?" Theron looked at Corin as if a lifetime had to fit in a single glance. "We will see the healers," he answered, voice wrapped in steel that had learned mercy. "We will ask questions with care." Cade swallowed ambition and bile together. "Take your claims," he said, forcing magnanimity. "Return to your ice palace and your laws. Obsidian Maw will be remembered today. So will justice, Theron replied. He lifted Ravenna off the dais because a king is allowed to decide how tenderness displays in public. Corin climbed onto the back of one dusk wolf as if he had done it before in a different life. The wolves cleared a path. They left Skeldar Keep to its banners and blood smell. Behind them, wind combed through the mountain's mane. In front, the road braided itself toward towers as white as kept promises. The Silvercrest Citadel received them with a hush armies can't enforce, only love can ask for. Guards in plate and wolf sigil knelt as Ravenna passed. Not in pity. In recognition. In the great halls, tapestries told the story of crowns carried lightly and battles fought for more than pride. Theron ordered the bath chambers opened, attendants sworn to kindness, healers fetched that understood both herbs and secrets. Leave the door, he told the guards outside, unlatched. She is done with locks. Steam lifted the smell of ash from Ravenna's skin. Water clouded, cleared, clouded again. Silk-kissed scar. Wounds refuse easy magic, some truths want time. When she stood, a mirror met her with honesty. She did not look away. She did not have to like what she saw to accept it. Theron entered quietly when the attendants withdrew. The dusk cloak hung from her shoulders like night, deciding to stay. He had changed into formal black, a field of winter with a single star at the throat. We have rooms prepared, he said. And for the boy. He eats as if he is remembering how. His name is Corin, Ravenna answered. The syllables had stopped cutting and started healing. He hums the royal lullaby. Theron's mouth hardened on pain and wonder. The council demands proof, he said. Protocol, doubt, all the predictable armor worn by wolves who fear not lies but being wrong in public. They fear truth that changes duty, Ravenna said. They fear losing me to it, he replied, which was another way of saying the same thing. They walked the corridor together, two shadows recognized by the torches. The High Council chamber opened like a stone mouth about to pronounce judgment. 10 elders sat arrayed beneath carvings of ancient oaths. Between two columns stood a woman in burgundy, composure polished to a mirror, Lady Seraphine Vale. Your Majesty, said Elder Torvian, head of the council. You claim the lost Luna stands before us. Forgive old wolves their caution. Caution is a virtue until it becomes a hiding place, Theron said. Name your proof. The truth fire, Seraphine suggested smoothly, lifting a brow in the direction of the brazier borne in by two priests. Let the flame decide. Torvian nodded. Let the flame decide. The fire rose white gold. Priest voices sang the old syllables. Ravenna stepped into the circle the way someone returns to a house rebuilt on its old foundation. State your name, Torvian intoned. Ravenna Solace. The flames brightened. Truth. State your bond. Lunamate to Theron Draven. The flames climbed. Truth. State your innocence regarding the nursery attack 7 years ago. No, the word was not a denial, it was a refusal. The seal behind her eyes tightened like a fist. Pain lanced. The flames faltered, gold dragging toward shadow. Seraphine's lashes lowered, measuring. Why can you not answer? Torvian pressed. Ravenna's hands found the brazier's lip and held it. Runic scars sparked angry gold. Because something is sitting on my memories like a vulture, she said evenly. Break the vulture, and I will answer until your doubts starve. The truth fire rolled. Gold held. No lie, only obstruction. The elders looked at one another with discomfort that always accompanies magic heavier than law. Until clarity, Torvian said, protocol requires confinement. Confine me to the open sky, Ravenna answered. No walls. I have suffered enough stone. Theron's jaw set. Confinement ends at sunrise. Between now and then, every scholar of cursecraft empties his head onto my desk. Seraphine's eyes shone with a sheen not unlike satisfaction. So prudent, Majesty. Ravenna crossed her gaze and saw no depth at all. The tower chamber locked itself when the door shut. It had windows carved to let in clean air and the smell of snow. She stood between both and refused to touch the bed. Sleep had never been only sleep since the deeps, it was where memories waited with teeth. Dawn fainted its first color when the latch turned again. Not a guard. Theron himself. Come, he said. Something has shifted. He led her into a smaller hall where 3 scouts knelt, and a child stood at their center in clean linen that hadn't had time to learn comfort yet. Corin's cheeks held color for the first time. His eyes had learned daylight. He held his hands behind his back because he didn't know what to do with them in rooms this large. The lead scout, Torm, bowed and spoke. On patrol, we encountered a feral pack near the northern ridge. 20 wolves. Hostile. Before we got engaged, the boy walked through them. Through them, Theron repeated. They bowed, Torm said. They obeyed. Ravenna looked at Corin. The lullaby glanced off her ribs from the inside like a bird learning windows. His irises flashed gold in the lamplight. Your name, she said carefully. Say it with your chest. He hesitated, looked at her, then at Theron, then found a shape that fit the space inside his bones. Corin Solistraven, he said, and it sounded like a bell finding its note. He hummed once without meaning to. The old melody laced the room. The runes in Ravenna's scars caught and flared. The tower felt too small for the truth trying to stand up straight. Her knees buckled as the seal broke like ice in a spring flood. Light scissored her vision. Memory flooded, a nursery of silver wood and moon silk, poison in the vents, a woman in wine-colored silk at the door with a vial and a smile, running, always running, through secret passages with a baby whose heartbeat taught her how to keep moving, an ambush at the border, wolfsbane and iron, a dark-mantled warden taking her child and disappearing into the trees, a curse spoken in a language the priests didn't teach anymore. The chamber did not just hear what she remembered. I wrote it. Letters of gold fire crawled the walls, forming words no liar could bear. Seraphine poisoned the air. Seraphine cursed the Luna. Seraphine sold the road. The guards' hands went to hilts by reflex. The priests outside crossed themselves with symbols older than the council's seals. Theron steadied Ravenna with both palms and looked past her at a wall telling him what his heart had suspected and his duty hadn't had permission to say. Where is she? He asked, voice low enough to freeze water. A runner skidded into the doorway. Lady Seraphine fled the citadel during the bell. Witnesses saw her ride north toward the old temple. Theron turned to Ravenna and Corin and did not bother with a question. Some wars didn't offer negotiations. Then we finish this, he said. The citadel opened its gates to let them pass under a sky clearing its throat for a storm. The wolves met them at the steps, not only the dusk three, but others who had run beside Theron when crowns were still stories boys told about their fathers. Corin slid onto a shadow wolf's back with the ease of memory wearing a new body. Ravenna felt her own wolf rise in her blood, stretching after a long containment. They took the northern path where the wind names each boulder and the pines refused to lie. Snow held itself back to hear. The old temple crouched from the trees with a mouth like a wound and candles bleeding red around its threshold. Lady Seraphine waited at the center of a crooked circle. Before her burned a flame like the truth fire, but wrong, the gold was curdled crimson. "I knew you'd bring your family," she said pleasantly, as if luncheon had succeeded the first invitation. "How intimate." Theron's wolves fanned. Ravenna stepped forward because some answers could only be asked at the distance a throat lays bare. "You poisoned a cradle," Ravenna said. Seraphine's mask cracked in a shrug. "I corrected a narrative that forgot me." "You cursed Luna." "I carved out the rival that made kings blind." "You sold a road to the wolves who feed on children." "I gave dogs a bone to keep them busy." Ravenna lifted both hands. The runes on her wrists ignited. The scraps of old chains melted and pooled, then rose as living gold links, flame woven into form. They wrapped her forearms like a vow finally spoken aloud. "You had everything," Seraphine said, composure sliding toward confession. "A king who worshipped, a crown that fit, a pack that adored. I taught him how to live with loss. I was there when he bled. That should count for something." "It counts for nothing against a cradle," Theron said, each syllable flat enough to break teeth. Seraphine cupped the corrupted flame and flung it like water. The crimson fire lashed. Wolves leapt. The air sang heat and ash. Ravenna struck with the chain. Where gold met red, corruption burned back to clean. Corin slid down from the wolf and planted his small feet like a promise. Feral shapes emerged in the tree-lean, eyes bright, bodies low, not hunters, not prey, pack. "Stand down," Corin said, voice pitched like a lullaby halfway to words. They did. Seraphine watched the scene and understood too many things at once. "So the boy lives," she whispered, eyes gone blade sharp. "Your grief was the only door I needed." How rude, to return. Ravenna's chain coiled the air. "Truth decides," she said. "Not me. Not you. Not even kings. The flame tells it." She lashed the gold around the corrupted brazier. The red writhed, hissed, and gave up its lie. Gold plume roared high, clean and implacable. It wrapped Seraphine in a column that did not burn skin so much as strip covering off intent. She tried defiance. She tried calculation. At last she tried honesty twisted into a martyr's shape. "I did it for love." "Love doesn't poison children," Ravenna said. The flame agreed. What happened next was thorough, not cruel. The magic consumed her deceptions first, then the spellwork she had hung around other people's lives, then the rest, grain by grain, not because fire enjoyed it, but because truth required it. When the light died, only a shard of black jewelry lay in the ash, the earring she had used as a focus. Theron stepped forward and crushed it. The echo sounded like a door unbolted in the minds of 1,000 wolves at once. The blood moon sank. Dawn climbed the pines and found people who had decided, at last, who they were. They returned to the citadel unescorted. No one in the north would have dared waylay that procession anyway. The streets filled with kneeling wolves, some in skin, some in fur, none in doubt. In the great hall, beneath banners that remembered their color, a circlet waited. It had been forged overnight from broken dungeon chain and masterwork gold, scars folded into beauty so plainly even skeptics felt quiet in their throats. Theron lifted it. His voice carried like a winter river, cold, clear, strong. "Ravenna Solace," he said, "you were stolen, silenced, branded as what you never were. Yet you endured until truth could find you. The North lays its weight on you again, not to crush but to crown." He set the circlet. The bond mark on their wrists blazed, not privately but for the hall to see. Wolves howled, a sound that rebuilt what grief had disassembled. Corin stood to the right, wearing a simple torque carved in the old style of the crown prince. He held himself like boys do when they finally see where they came from and where they're going. The citadel did not cheer. "It's something Ed louder, believed." Quick pause, viewers. If the story has you by the throat, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. What's the biggest lesson so far? That truth takes its time, or that names are power? Drop your take, I'm reading every one. Beyond the banners and vows, the story had work left. The lullaby hadn't finished singing all its verses. The mountain still kept a ledger of wrongs whose pages hadn't been set on fire yet. Obsidian Maw would lick its wounds and count its allies. The elders would ask what seals exist that can sit on memory for 7 winters and who paid for them. And a kingdom would learn how to carry a Luna who had learned more about chains than any crown should require. But for a breath, the North stood tall enough to meet its own sky again. The morning after the coronation, the citadel hummed like a heartbeat rediscovering rhythm. Snow glittered across the battlements, the air tasted of smoke, steel, and questions. Ravenna Solace stood on the northern balcony, the wind tugging strands of red through her dark hair. The crown Theron had forged from her dungeon chains rested lightly on her brow, as if acknowledging that survival itself was a coronation. Below her, wolves trained in the courtyard, movements sharp and synchronized, their howls carrying discipline rather than despair. It was the sound of a kingdom waking up. Behind her, the doors opened. Theron Draven, now dressed not as conqueror but as ruler, stepped into the light. He moved like a man trying to learn peace after years of war. "Council summons me," he said quietly. "They want to discuss reparations with Obsidian Maw." "Reparations," Ravenna repeated. "They sold lives. There's no number large enough to balance that scale." "I know," Theron replied. "But politics rarely pays in justice. It pays in delay." Ravenna turned, the cold sun sketching scars across her collarbones. "Then delay will be the language of wolves who haven't learned consequence." He studied her for a moment, the shadow of pride touching his expression. "The Luna I remember believed mercy was stronger than punishment." "The Luna you remember hadn't seen children chained in the dark," she said. Silence bridged them. Between memory and now, compassion and fury struggled for the same heartbeat. "Where's Corin?" she asked. "In the East Wing," Theron said. "The healers say his blood reacts to lunar energy, stronger than any royal line we've seen. They think it's because he was raised beyond the pack bond. He learned to live without permission." Ravenna smiled faintly, the kind of smile that holds both pride and sorrow. "He learned survival before he learned language. That doesn't come without a price." Theron nodded. "He asked for you." Her gaze softened. "Then he'll get me." The East Wing had been a nursery once. Now it was filled with the hum of crystal lanterns and the scent of healing herbs. Corin sat cross-legged on a thick fur rug, surrounded by books and scrolls older than any living wolf. His small fingers traced symbols he didn't understand but somehow knew. When Ravenna entered, his eyes lifted instantly, those molten gold eyes that mirrored Theron's. "You came," he said. "Always," she replied, kneeling beside him. He pointed to a page. "This one. It hums when I touch it." The parchment shimmered faintly beneath his hand. The rune was old, predating Pax, predating the moon temples. A cursebreaker sigil, warped by misuse. Ravenna's chest tightened. "Where did you find this?" "The library tower. It called me." Before she could respond, the light flickered. The air thickened, pressing down like invisible chains. From the far end of the room, a shadow moved, thin, serpentine, whispering words that didn't belong to this century. Ravenna's instincts ignited. She pulled Corin close, shielding him with her body as the shadow coalesced into a figure, half-transparent, eyes empty hollows of red smoke. A voice slithered out. "You broke what should have stayed sealed." Ravenna's claws extended in an instant, gold light crawling up her arms. "Name yourself." The spirit laughed, a sound that cracked like stone under pressure. "Names are for the living. I serve the one who bought your silence." Theron burst through the door before the last word finished echoing. His wolves followed, their hackles raised. The shadow hissed and retreated against the far wall, but its shape held. "What is it?" Theron demanded. Ravenna's eyes didn't leave the apparition. The curse wasn't only a memory. It was a seal, guarded by something bound to whoever cast it. Corin clung tighter. "It knows me." The spirit turned its head toward the boy. "Of course I do, little heir. You were meant to die." The words struck like blades. Theron's growl filled the room, low and murderous. "Then you'll die twice." He raised his hand, but Ravenna stopped him. "Wait. If this spirit guards the curse, destroying it might strengthen the seal. We need to know who it serves." The ghost smiled, "Or what passed for it. You already know her name." "Seraphine Vale is dead," Ravenna said coldly. "Death doesn't always free the damned," it replied. "Some bargains keep collecting long after the flesh is gone." The room darkened, and with that, the shadow vanished into mist. Theron turned sharply to his captain. "Seal the east wing. No one enters or leaves without my mark." The captain saluted and left immediately. When the silence returned, Ravenna drew Corin closer. "It wanted him. Not me." Theron looked at both of them, his jaw tightening. "Because the curse didn't die, it moved." That evening, thunder rolled over the mountains. The citadel trembled with it, as if the gods were shifting in their sleep. The council chamber burned with torches when Theron entered. The elders rose, not out of respect, but fear disguised as protocol. "We've received word," said Elder Torvian gravely. "Obsidian Maw is gathering. Alpha Cade rallies his surviving packs. He claims the Silvercrest King stole what was lawfully his property." Theron's voice was low and measured. "He wants a war." "Perhaps," Torvian said, "he wants to finish one." Theron leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "If Cade wants to test the old war gods again, he'll find out I've forgotten none of their names." Elder Mirren, the only one brave enough to speak plainly, said, "Majesty, your Luna's return changes everything. Old loyalties will shift. The balance. The balance was broken when they caged her, Theron snapped. Now it will be corrected. The council fell silent. Only the storm answered. Later, in her chamber, Ravenna lit a single candle. It flickered, then flared taller than it should have, as if remembering the truth fire. She stared into it until the reflection blurred. Your eyes will burn out if you stare that long, Theron said softly behind her. They've burned before, she replied without turning. They can survive another flame. He came closer. We found something in Seraphine's old quarters. Records, letters, to a name I've never heard before. Etheris. Ravenna froze. That's not a name. It's a title. Theron frowned. Explain. Etheris was the first curse weaver, from before the packs formed. Legend said he bartered with the moon for power and lost his soul in the trade. His followers believed pain purifies blood. They survived through the centuries as shadows in courts, always behind someone else's throne. And Seraphine served him. She summoned him, Ravenna corrected. She didn't just want to curse me, she wanted to open a path for him to walk again. Theron's expression hardened. Then we find the path, and we seal it shut. Ravenna touched the flame again, her fingertips tracing its edge. Etheris's mark would require 3 anchors: blood, soul, and memory. We destroyed her soul's anchor when you shattered the earring. But if her blood magic survived, it would cling to the one who broke her curse, Theron finished, eyes flicking to Corin's room down the hall. Ravenna nodded slowly. Our son carries her bloodline's echo. That's why the spirit came. Then it's not just a haunting, Theron said. It's inheritance. That night, Ravenna dreamt of moonlight fractured through glass. She stood in a forest of whispering trees, every branch dripping blood instead of sap. At the center, a man-shaped shadow sat upon a throne of bones. You wear freedom like a crown, it said, voice like velvet dragged through gravel. But freedom is only a chain that changed its name. Ravenna's claws curled reflexively. You're Etheris. The figure tilted its head. Your curse was artistry. 7 years of silence, 7 years of despair, all so a single boy could be born with power enough to open a door I cannot reach myself. You'll never touch him. The shadow smiled. The moon thought that once about me, too. When she woke, her pulse was hammering so hard she thought she'd shifted in her sleep. Across the chamber, the candle she'd left burning had turned silver white, and in its smoke, symbols of the same runes from the nursery floated before fading away. Morning came without warmth. The citadel stirred uneasily. Wolves whispered of omens, the moon bleeding red, the river freezing mid-current. Ravenna and Theron stood side by side at the window overlooking the courtyard, watching as the healers marked protective wards around the palace walls. Do you believe in prophecy? She asked suddenly. Theron gave a low, humorless laugh. I married one. She almost smiled. Then listened carefully. The curse was a doorway, not a prison. Etheris used Seraphine to open the first half. If Corin's power awakened fully, it could open the second. Then we train him, Theron said. To master it before it masters him. Or we bury it before the world burns. He turned sharply. No. I'm not saying kill him. You don't have to. I hear the fear in your voice. She faced him fully now. He's 7 years old, Theron. He hums magic that answers him. If Etheris takes root through that link, there will be no kingdom left to save. And if we teach him to wield it, Theron countered, he could be the key to ending the curse forever. Ravenna's eyes glimmered, pain and hope at war. And if you're wrong? Then I'll fall with him, he said. The silence between them wasn't emptiness. It was full, heavy, alive. A vow without ceremony. At noon, the palace bells tolled 3 times. A messenger burst into the throne hall, falling to one knee before the royal dais. Majesty. Scouts from the southern border report, Obsidian Maw marches north. Theron's wolves tensed. Ravenna rose to her full height beside him. How many? She asked. Thousands. And they're not alone. There are shades moving with them. Spirits in armor. The dead walking under banners of smoke. Theron exhaled once, controlled and cold. Cade has called on Etheris. Ravenna looked to the high windows where the sunlight had already dimmed. Then the curse isn't waiting. It's coming. Night returned earlier than it should have. Over the mountains, the moon bled red again, spreading its light like a wound across the valley. The air trembled. In the distance, the drums of war began to echo. Corin stood on the terrace between his parents, the silver sigils on his skin glowing faintly under the moon. He didn't flinch. They're coming for me, he said quietly. No, Ravenna said, kneeling to his height. They're coming for what they think you are. And they're wrong. Theron's eyes burned gold in the dark. We defend our blood. We defend the pack. The boy nodded slowly, then raised his hands, palms outward. The sigils pulsed brighter, syncing with the rhythm of the drums in the distance. The mountain answered with a tremor. Ravenna felt it in her bones, the curse responding, but not in defiance, in recognition. He's calling to them, she whispered. No, Theron said, watching the valley below as lights moved like 1,000 eyes through the fog. They're answering him. Far below, the Obsidian Maw army stopped marching. The shades within their ranks faltered. Chains of smoke binding them began to shimmer and break. Wolves turned against specters. The dead fell silent. In the citadel courtyard, the boy lowered his hands. The moon brightened. Ravenna fell to her knees, stunned. He severed their link. He freed the dead. Theron looked at his son like a man seeing divinity in a child's skin. The curse made him a doorway, he said. But he just chose which way it opens. The sound of howling rose, not from the enemy, but from every wolf in Silvercrest. Hope, raw and ancient, spread like wildfire. Ravenna stood, eyes glinting with tears she refused to wipe away. Then the war begins with us, not them. Theron drew his blade, the steel catching the reflection of the blood moon. Then let the gods remember the night the slaves became kings. Quick pause, viewers. What do you think of Corin's power? Is it salvation, or a curse waiting to bloom again? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe. Stormlight gnawed the edges of the sky as the Obsidian Maw appeared in the valley below, a dark tide armored in iron and oath-breaking. Standards of black glass rattled in the wind. Drums rolled like distant thunder. Between formations, war priests dragged braziers etched with hungry sigils, their flames breathing crimson, not heat but intent. On the northern wall, Silvercrest stood shoulder to shoulder. Veterans who had bled for old vows. Young wolves who had never seen real war and were learning too fast. The citadel's battlements were carved with moon runes and truth wards, steady as mountains. Theron Draven took his place on the high parapet, cloak cutting the wind, eyes molten and unblinking. To his right, Ravenna Solace, the Luna who returned from chains to crown. On his left, Captain Torm and the Dusk Wolves, three silent shadows that had learned command from the man who never raised his voice more than necessary. Between them stood Corin, small and unafraid, the gold in his irises bright enough to answer any star that dared look down. Scouts called signals. Bells chimed once, gates sealed. The citadel inhaled as one living thing. Alpha Cade Onyx rode out from the obsidian moor ranks on a mount armored in black scales. He reined in just beyond arrow range and lifted his spear in a slow circle, claiming the air as theater. Silvercrest, his voice boomed, thick with pride and the stale perfume of purchased courage. Yield the traitor Luna and the whelp who breaks graves. Deliver them, and I'll leave you enough men to plant next spring. Torm laughed, sharp and cold. Theron didn't. His reply landed without effort. Bring your spring, Cade. We'll salt your fields with it. Cade's grin hardened. He gestured. War priests stepped forward, tongues cut for vows that only blood understands. They fed the crimson braziers with feathers and bone dust, then pointed staffs toward the citadel walls. The first wave came like a red tide of smoke men, shades forced into shape by ritual, armor clanking without weight. 4,000 at once, their empty helms turning in perfect unison. When they moved, the ground forgot how to hold its shape. Corin took one step forward. He lifted his hands, palms open to the storm. The sigils that marked his skin brightened from silver to white, then to a pale, steady gold. He didn't chant. He didn't strain. He simply chose. The shade stumbled. Chains of smoke visible only to the living eye snapped like cheap wire. Helmets fell. Swords clattered against nothing because nothing remained to carry them. In a breath, the first wave collapsed into ash that turned the valley floor gray. No one on the walls cheered. Belief took their throats first. Cade's jaw bunched. He lifted his spear and roared. The living charged, obsidian maw elites, the same black leather cruelty that once patrolled Skeldark's dungeons. Ladders slammed against stone. Hooks bit the parapets. The air filled with iron, wolfsbane, and the sour wine of rune bolts. Hold the wall, Theron said, and the command rippled through every tendon and blade. They held. Arrows sang. Lances thrust. Wolves in skin and wolves in fur fought elbow to elbow, trading space in a choreography learned from necessity. Every time a ladder rose, it met a dusk wolf, a captain, or a Luna who could turn chains into light. Ravenna moved with an efficiency that felt like music. The living chain around her forearms unfurled, a golden river that coiled and lashed. Where it caught, it did not merely wound, it burned false oaths out of flesh. Men who'd sold their will to Cade faltered as something in them remembered they'd been born free. Some dropped weapons. Some turned and ran. Some stood there shaking, eyes wet and new. Down. Torm barked. A siege engine coughed on the far ridge. The first stone crashed into the wall and blew mortar into dust. Runes held, but hairline cracks crept like thin frost. Cade's war priests lifted their staves again, this time not for shades, but for blight. A tidal slick of black mist rolled across the ground, devouring grass and turning exposed roots to rot. "Moonfire," Theron said, eyes on the blight. "Now." The high keeps flared. From recesses carved into the wall crown, the citadel released a pale blue fire that didn't burn, it corrected. It poured down in soft sheets, meeting the rot and unmaking it the way dawn unmakes night. The mist hissed, tried to climb, failed, and recoiled. Ravenna felt the fire answer her blood. It wasn't heat, it was memory. The old moon flame, older than any pack. A power that had been silent in her since the nursery and the curse. It found her now, and it sang. She lifted both arms. The chain brightened from gold to moonlight, and the moonfire in the keeps flared in answer, changing hue, deepening from pale to living silver. Wolves looked up. Even Cade's brutes stopped to stare. "Luna," Theron said, just loud enough for her and the wind. "Take what you need." She did. The fire flowed to her hands, braided itself through the chain, and swept the battlements with a cleansing arc that seared no ally and touched every enemy with the weight of truth. Hooks unlatched. Ladders fell. Men clung and slid. The ground met them without mercy. Cade hurled his spear. It flew like a viper straight for Ravenna's heart. Theron moved before the spear understood distance. He caught the shaft in both hands. Steel screamed. Gold eyes flashed. He twisted once. The spear broke with a sound like lightning finding its answer. The army saw their alpha lose a weapon. Doubt traveled quicker than any order. Cade bellowed to drown it. He raised both arms. Behind him, more braziers lit. Crimson columns lashed the sky and then split. From each column burst a thing with too many joints and not enough face, wearing scraps of armor that shouldn't fit anything living. Not shades. Not men. Summoned hunger bound in iron, white binds, the folklore mothers whispered to make children stay close to the fire. They climbed the wall like spiders. Steel glanced off their limbs. Claws sank without purchase. They didn't bleed. They remembered bleeding and refused to repeat it. One reached the parapet. It leapt for Corin. Ravenna met it midair. The chain bit through two limbs and wrapped the third. The creature twisted with unnatural grace, jaws opening not sideways but like a book. It screamed without sound. Corin didn't retreat. He placed his palm against its brow. The sigils on his skin flashed, and the white bind fell limp, crumbling into rust and thoughts it could no longer hold together. "Don't touch them," Ravenna snapped, breath short. "It listens when I say stop," Corin answered, calm but pale. Theron's hand rested briefly on the boy's shoulder and then left to find his sword's hilt again. Once is luck. Twice is an invitation. More weight binds crested the wall like a tide coming to collect a debt. The dusk wolves threw themselves into the crush, tearing where tearing still mattered. Torm and the line captains tied the parapet into knots the enemy couldn't pull apart. Ravenna moved to the weakest point, chain-carving arcs of moonfire that answered her like it had been waiting 7 years for instruction. The old runes scarred into her wrists brightened, not with suppression but with sanction. Every enemy touch reminded her of iron cuffs, cold stone, a child's humming through bars. Every coil of the chain reminded her of a crown reforged from the same metal. Survival had converted cruelty into authority. She used it. Cade's war priests changed their pattern. They stopped feeding braziers and began to bleed themselves, palms, tongues, the tender skin under ribs. Their chant dropped into a key that made the air feel wrong in the lungs. The crimson flares sank. The ground under the citadel's foundation trembled. Etheris, Torm hissed. The hill below the northern curtain wall cracked. Black light spilled through like oil on fire. Not a gate, a hinge. Theron leaned over the parapet, eyes narrowed. He's trying to open under us. Ravenna felt the answer in her blood again. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Etheris had left something in her, not corruption, not a leash, but a coordinate. A trace woven into her marrow, where the door ends. Let me, she said. Theron glanced once, she didn't ask often. He nodded. Ravenna set both palms against the stone. Old moon sigils lit along the wall in a pattern she hadn't seen since childhood lessons at a moon temple now fallen to ivy. The chain uncoiled, slid between stones, and found the citadel's bones. Fire ran through mortar. The tremor paused, then receded like a hand discovered where it shouldn't be. Cade screamed something no one needed translated. War priests collapsed, either spent or broken. The hinge under the hill guttered and died. The ground closed over it as if ashamed. Subscribe to the fight or sit in the stands, Torm shouted down the line with a grin that remembered humor. Wolves laughed once, quick, savage, alive. Below, the obsidian maw faltered. Their elites still climbed, their numbers still pressed, but their certainty lost its tendons. From the rear, riders in gray formation broke formation, looked at the mountain, and turned their horses not to flee, but to kneel. Silvercrest watched enemies choose to stop being enemies. That kind of victory doesn't fit in songs, it lives in the marrow. Cade had one ritual left. He lifted both arms. His voice cracked on a note men aren't supposed to reach. Across the valley, the sky rippled like hot air. The air tasted of iron filings. Sound thinned to a thread, and snapped. Silence hit the citadel like a wall. No howl. No order. No clang. Mouths moved, nothing reached the ear. Ravenna's chain dimmed. The moonfire guttered. Corin's sigils flickered as if the world had just unlearned the concept of sound, and magic didn't know where to go. The obsidian maw surged in the quiet. Hooks found purchase. White binds leapt. The living climbed over the fallen and used the dead for ladders. Without sound, timing became guesswork, fear grew teeth. Corin closed his eyes. He pressed his hands flat against the stone like he had against the brow of a creature that shouldn't exist. He didn't try to make a sound. He made a pattern. The sigils along the wall didn't need ears. They needed a sequence. He traced the lullaby with his fingers, not as notes but as intervals. The citadel felt the shape of the song that raised its children and buried its old. The moonfire remembered the math of it. Light returned, not as flame but as pulse. The silence shattered. Sound returned like surf. Wolves roared. Orders snapped. Steel sang relief. Theron laughed once, a single bright war note, and waded into the next wave as if the concept of fatigue had never been invented for him. He moved without hurry, the way winter moves down a mountain, sure of its destination, patient with resistance. Cade saw the line hold and did what small men with large territories always do when the stage betrays them. He looked for a smaller stage. His gaze found the parapet where a boy stood between a king and a Luna. His hand found a knife he hadn't earned. His heel found a path no one had marked. He went for Corin. Ravenna saw him coming the way wolves see weather, too early and exactly on time. She moved. So did Theron. So did Torm. So did half a dozen shadows that would rather die than explain to a child why they weren't faster. The knife never reached its mark. Garrick, the warden of the deeps, the man who used to stand in the cleansing chamber with a face that had learned resignation, appeared from the dead angle of the stair. He took Cade's wrist in both hands. He turned, bone and tendon choosing new loyalties with a pop. The knife slipped. Garrick drove his forehead into Cade's nose with the dignity of a man finishing an old accounting. "You sold children," Garrick said in a voice made for eulogies, not arguments. "Debts due." Cade reeled. Theron was there. Not for speeches. He didn't decapitate. He didn't dismember. He took Cade by the collar, hauled him to the parapet edge, and held him over the valley where the obsidian maw could see what happens when a mountain refuses to move. "Look," Theron said, quiet and merciless. "That is your future. Choose it now or walk away and spend your lives paying for today with work none of you will complain about." Men looked up at their alpha choking on wind and realized hierarchy is only a thought held in common. Thoughts can change. Swords dropped. Hooks unlatched. Ladders fell backward. The army broke, not into a rout but into a release. Some ran. Some knelt. Some walked away without turning their backs because shame had better manners than fear. Theron pulled Cade back onto the stones and planted him to kneel. He set the broken spear haft against Cade's chest like a ledger pinning a debt. "You don't get executed," he said. "You get a lifetime of work. You will rebuild every home you burned. You will bury every bone you unearthed. You will never hold a chain again unless it's to lift a beam." Cade spat blood. "You can't make me a slave." "Correct," Theron said. "Only you can. I'm making you useful." The line laughed again, involuntary and raw. It felt like air after deep water. The siege ended not with a final blow but with a decision. The obsidian maw stopped being an army. The valley remembered it was a valley. The citadel held. Wolves carried their wounded below. Healers opened satchels of leaf and promise. Families found one another and counted names until the count matched love. On the high parapet, Ravenna leaned against the stone. The chain on her arms dimmed from moonlight to metal. Corin stood still, pale and steady, as duskwolves pressed their foreheads against his hands like children asking a story. Torm clasped Garrick's forearm. "You could have chosen a quieter redemption." Garrick shrugged. "Noise suits some reckonings." Theron approached Ravenna and looked past her to the valley where enemies had put down spears without a curse to bend their wrists. The king's mouth softened at the edges. "I've fought 100 battles. This is the first time I felt one stop." Ravenna watched Corin. He untied the knot. "We cut the rope." Both were required. Thunder rippled once, distant and tired. The storm had spent itself on men and found them not worth its last lightning. Night settled. The citadel lit lanterns and sang, not a victory song, but the low, old melody of surviving and meaning it. In the moon room, hours later, Ravenna stood with the high priestess beside the great basin of silver water. The surface mirrored the sky with an accuracy that made stars look like secrets being honest. You carry his mark, the priestess said without accusation. I know, Ravenna answered. The reflection showed the scars at her wrists, the faint sheen under the skin where Etheris had nested a coordinate. Not a leash. A doorframe. The door is closed, the priestess said. For now. He'll knock again. What will you do when he does? Ravenna looked at the reflection of her son, sleeping in the next room with a wolf curled at his feet. Teach the boy to answer no without anger. The priestess smiled, small, surprised. That's not magic. It's the rarest kind, Ravenna said. Footsteps crossed the threshold. Theron joined them, his presence making the room feel finished. He wrapped his cloak around her shoulders without comment. She didn't thank him, she pressed closer. We'll need terms for those who laid down arms, he said. Work crews. Oath reweaving. A path back. Make it hard enough to be real, Ravenna said, and possible enough to matter. He nodded. And Cade? Let him build, she said. Hate is a luxury we can't afford. You're merciful again, he said, not unkindly. I'm practical, she replied. War ends when work begins. He kissed her forehead, brief and anchoring. I will send the council something they're not used to, good news. A bell chimed once in the distance. Not alarm. A simple hour. Ravenna traced the moon basin's rim. There's one more reckoning. Theron's hand tightened around hers. Name it. The curse's second hinge, she said. We shut the one under the hill. Etheris will try another. He'll use a place I can find because he put it in my blood. Then we find it first. Corin's small voice from the doorway, not asleep at all. We don't find it. We invite it. Both turned. He stood with the calm of a child who had learned storms personally. Doors answer knocks. If we knock first, we choose which room opens. Theron frowned. Explain. Corin padded in, bare feet whispering on stone. He placed his palm on the basin. The silver water rippled, not with waves but with geometry, circles inside circles, all aligned on a point that hovered over the northern forest where the old temple crumbled. Not there, Corin said. Deeper. The reflection dived below roots and rock. It reached a cave mouth shaped like a wound hidden under a glacier older than any pack. Runes lined the ice, not carved but grown. The basin's water trembled. Ravenna exhaled. Etheris nested his last hinge in the oldest cold. Theron's eyes flashed. Good. I prefer clear air. Ravenna wiped one hand across the water. The image steadied. We go at dawn. Not an army, Corin said. Armies make doors want to open. Who, then? Theron asked. Ravenna counted without counting. The bond. The boy. The wolves who knew the lullaby before it had words. And one man who understands debts. Garrick waited outside the moon room as if called. Perhaps he had been. Some reckonings arrive at their own time. Warden, Theron said, how are your knees on ice? Worse than my conscience, Garrick replied. That should suit the work. Ravenna smiled, brief, approving. At dawn. The citadel slept the way soldiers sleep, standing where needed, lying where permitted, dreaming with one eye open. The wind pulled frost through the banners and made each thread silver. The mountain watched. It had watched 1,000 years of wolves try to grow into something their grandchildren would respect. Tonight, it seemed to decide the experiment was worth another season. Quick breather for everyone watching. Is mercy a strength or a liability after a war like this? And what would you do with Alpha Cade, chains, exile, or hard labor under watch? Tell me in the comments, and hit subscribe. The sky before dawn was a bruise. Clouds hung low, heavy with snow that refused to fall. Every sound in the citadel felt sharpened, the scrape of boots, the click of harness, the quiet clatter of courage being fastened in place. At the north gate, Theron, Ravenna, Corin, and Garrick stood beneath a lantern's pale circle of light. No procession. No banners. Only the four of them and 3 dusk wolves, silent shadows ready to vanish between heartbeats. The gatekeeper bowed once and opened the iron doors. The mountain exhaled a cold older than memory. Once we pass the ridge, Ravenna said, tightening her cloak, there's no law, no moonfire, no sanctuary. Only the place Etheris built for himself in exile. Then we bring him loneliness, Theron replied. Corin looked up at them both, eyes reflecting the faintest traces of dawn. He already knows we're coming. He's been waiting since the curse broke. Garrick spat into the snow. Then let's not keep a ghost bored. They rode north through a wilderness that felt half asleep and half listening. The world here was stripped to bone, pines frozen mid-bough, streams silenced under armor of ice. Wolves padded behind, their breath misting like prayers in the cold. By midday, the wind began to sing. Not the natural howl of weather, but a rhythm, rising, falling, repeating in perfect intervals. A song built from echoes and old power. The mountain's voice, Ravenna murmured. It's called the one who carries its coordinates. Corin blinked up at her. Me. She nodded. It remembers your blood. When they reached the glacier, the air grew sharp enough to taste. The world became blue and white and nothing else. The cave mouth waited ahead, an immense arch of translucent ice carved by hands not human, not wolf, not meant for warmth. Runes glowed faintly across its surface, pulsing like veins. They hummed in patterns that matched the lullaby's hidden rhythm. Ravenna's chain stirred against her arm, glowing faint gold. This is the hinge, she said softly. The door ether is left unfinished. Theron drew his sword. Its edge caught the light and turned it into a promise. Then we finish it. Corin stepped forward before anyone could stop him. The boy placed his palms on the ice. The runes brightened instantly, recognizing blood that matched the curse's design. Ravenna's hand shot out. Corin, wait. The ice groaned. The cave opened. Wind howled out of the darkness, carrying whispers in every voice they'd ever lost. The sound of chains, fire, and lullabies twisted together into something neither song nor scream. The ground shook. Cracks spidered outward. From within the ice, a shadow unfolded, vast, formless, wearing the suggestion of a body too large to belong anywhere sane. Eyes like 2 dying stars blinked open. A voice filled the glacier, smooth and immense. So the blood returns. The Luna who defied the curse. The king who broke it. The child who carries my key. Theron stepped forward, unflinching. Etheris. The name shuddered through the air like thunder trapped inside glass. You built a door from my wife's body, Theron said, every word an accusation that cut the cold. You turned her womb into a passage and called it art. You made a child your hinge. Creation always costs, Etheris said. You call it blasphemy, I call it craftsmanship. Ravenna raised her hand. The chain coiled and gleamed. You've taken enough. The door closes today. The shadow smiled, an eclipse bending itself into mockery. Close a door, Luna, and you close what's behind it. I am not only cursed. I am the part of you that survived by hardening. The part that hates mercy. Lock me out, and you will need me again. Her jaw tightened. Then I'll find another way to be strong. The ice cracked wider. The shadow spread its arms like wings. Show me. Moonfire erupted from the chain. Theron's blade sang, its edge glowing white as dawn. Garrick drew a blade forged from prison iron, the same alloy once used to cage Ravenna, now sharpened against guilt. The cave became a storm of light and shadow, flame and frost. Every swing, every strike left silence that hurt the ears. Etheris moved like smoke, impossible to wound, everywhere at once. He struck with whispers instead of claws. You forgave your tormentors, Luna. That mercy is weakness. You called the child hope, but he is proof of my permanence. You think love is defiance, it is only a habit of wearing a crown. Each sentence pressed into their bones like poison. Theron roared, not a word, just a sound older than language, and plunged his blade into the ice itself. The glacier screamed. Gold fissures spread in all directions. Ravenna slammed her palms down. The chain wrapped around Etheris's formless throat and flared. You lived through me, she shouted, but you will die through him. Corin's small voice cut through the noise, clear and even. No. He doesn't die through me. He ends because I forgive him. Everything stopped. Even the air forgot to move. Etheris turned, the endless night of his form flickering. You can't. Corin's hands glowed gold. Not fierce, not burning, warm. The light wasn't destruction, it was absolution. I forgive you, he said again. Because I'm not yours. The cave exploded in silence. The ice shattered inward, collapsing into waves of light that folded back into the mountain. The runes burned, then cooled, then disappeared. Etheris screamed once, not pain, but disbelief. The sound faded into snow. Then there was only quiet. When the storm cleared, the glacier was gone. In its place stood a valley of pale glass, smooth as a mirror and empty of curse. The four of them stood at its center, breath frosting in the still air. Ravenna dropped to one knee, exhausted. The chain on her arms cracked, split, and fell away in harmless fragments. Theron caught her before she hit the ground. It's over, he whispered. She shook her head weakly. No. It's healed. Corin looked up at the sky. The clouds had broken. The moon shone silver and whole again, unblemished. It's quiet, he said softly. I can't hear him anymore. That's how peace sounds, Garrick muttered, voice raw. Theron smiled faintly. I'd forgotten. They returned to Silvercrest as the first spring thaw began. Snow melted from rooftops in slow applause. Wolves greeted them at the gates with disbelief turned into celebration. Word of the glacier's collapse spread faster than any rider. Priests called it divine reckoning, scholars called it restoration. The people called it something simpler, freedom. For weeks, the citadel became a forge of renewal. Cade and his men labored under watch, rebuilding roads and homes with bare hands and silent regret. Garrick oversaw them, patient but precise, making sure every stone laid was a confession and a promise. The High Council met under banners cleaned of blood. This time, they bowed first. In the great hall, before them all, Ravenna stood beside Theron with Corin between them. Her crown gleamed not from gold but from the light that seemed to follow her. Theron raised his hand. The curse has ended. The war is over. But peace must be worked like metal. Every wolf here is responsible for what the next child inherits. He turned to his son. Corin Draven, child of truth fire, breaker of silence, you will lead one day, but not through fear. You'll lead by knowing what it costs to forgive. The boy nodded gravely. I'll remember. The crowd bowed, not out of duty, but devotion. That night, the citadel held a feast unlike any in living memory. No crowns. No thrones. Wolves and humans, servants and nobles, all ate at the same tables. The halls glowed with candlelight and laughter. Ravenna sat beside Theron, watching their people dance, her hand resting lightly on his. For the first time in years, the silence in her mind was just silence. You think it's really over? She asked. Theron looked out across the hall. No. But it's begun again, and that's better. Outside, snow fell in slow, lazy spirals, as if the world itself had exhaled. Later, when the hall had emptied and the fires had dimmed, Ravenna walked alone to the balcony. The moon hung low, round and full, painting the courtyard in silver. Corin appeared beside her, half asleep but curious. Mama? Yes, love. Why did forgiving him make him disappear? She smiled, a weary, beautiful curve of truth. Because forgiveness isn't for the guilty. It's for the free. He leaned against her side, warm and safe. Then we're free now. She kissed his hair. Now we begin learning what to do with it. Behind them, Theron's footsteps approached. He slipped his arm around her waist and looked down at their son. Tomorrow, we will rebuild the Moon Temple, he said quietly. Ravenna nodded. And this time, no chains. No secrets. The three of them stood together beneath the light that had once judged them, now blessing them instead. The moonfire that had burned cities now rested in the hearts of a family, contained, understood, alive. And far beneath the glacier where darkness once ruled, the last ember of Etheris's shadow flickered once and died, swallowed by the same silence that once caged a queen. Some stories end with revenge. This one ends with release. When the chains that bound her became the crown that saved them all, Ravenna's solace proved that survival isn't strength, it's transformation. If this story gripped you, drop your favorite line in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more epic love and war tales like this, where power meets mercy, and every scar earns its light.